think often we try really hard to rip off or rip apart something that hurt us when it was never really meant to be dispensed of. It was meant to be healed because it wasn't something that was wrong, it was something that was wounded. I said this to a friend and they said that it's like picking a scab. I really like that. The scab is meant to heal and it might look ugly for a time, but if you pick at it, it just makes it worse. But when you let it heal, it becomes fully restored and integrated into who you are. And I'm not even going to say that, it's going to come out like better or more beautiful or anything like that. I think that's kind of a silly, maybe even naive point of view. That's more about comfort and less about truth, but it will become a part of you the right way. So, for instance, when you lose someone, whether it be to a breakup or to death, like someone passes away, there's this wound that forms, and for a long time, this wound hurts you and it feels like it's the wrong thing. And maybe it's not the wrong thing because it's still a part of you. Just like that person will always be a part of you. They'll always be a part of you in a unique way that's subjective to you, and they won't be a part of you the same way that they were a part of someone else, but it's still a part of you, and they're still a part of you. But now the mode in which they're a part of you is different, because before it was a dynamic living part of you, one that was changing and being formed, and that doesn't hurt so bad because it's still there. It's still living and dynamic and interactive. But now that part of you stopped. It's stale. It's final. And finality is already something that's very uncomfortable for us as humans. And then when something becomes final that you never wanted to be final, when you enjoyed that interactive, dynamic experience, it can begin to hurt you. And what we have to realize, I think, is that while that person is gone, they're no longer a part of you. And because they're no longer a part of you, you have to understand how to integrate the new mode of existence in which they exist in your psyche. So at one point, the mode of existence was fluid. And so it was almost like if I splash water in your face. It's like even if they hurt you, that experience is still interactive. And so it can be fixed and mended pretty easily, just like water can be cleaned up pretty easily. So if I splash water in your face, it's not like it hurts. The difference when someone passes, when there's a sort of final breaking, is that water is less like water, or that I should say that mode of existence in which they exist in your psyche, as I said before, is less like water and more like a stone, because it's now stale and final and hard and rigid. And so if I were to throw it in your face, it would hurt. Just like if I threw a rock in your face, it would hurt. And so I think that this stone, this rigid part of you, this sort of mass almost that grows or begins to grow in you, is wrong. And in your body, even your mind first, but then even your body seems to reject this thing. It wants to reject it. It wants to say that it's wrong. And so what will happen is we'll begin to rip and tear ourselves apart to get this thing out. And what we'll end up doing is we'll rip apart and tear apart things about us that were never meant to be ripped or torn out in the first place. They were never the cause of the harm in the first place. And furthermore, and well, you might say the deeper level to that is that the thing that you're trying to rip out was never meant to be ripped out in the first place. And I think an example of this is like when you fall into a deep depression, you begin to quit doing things that were direct sources of your happiness before. Like you become less mobile. You're indoors more. You're not doing you're not creating as much. You're not doing the things that are typically very you. They're typically very life-giving to you. And so what your body and what your brain is doing unconsciously usually is that it's trying to rip apart things, and it's trying to really just get in there and tear this thing out. I think what you realize on the first level is that it doesn't actually fix anything. Just like worrying about an event that's upcoming, having anxiety about something doesn't actually fix it. You just kind of it's just like picking a scab. Just like picking a scab doesn't actually fix the wound, it just makes it worse. And so what we have to realize is that instead of picking a scab, the healing takes time, and it often takes you not really doing anything about it. And those feelings and those emotions that you get regarding this pain that you feel, you just kind of have to put them aside and live with them in a sense, but experience them. Just like you can't help but experience the pain from a scar in its early stages, but over time, and not out of neglect, the scar begins to heal and the pain subsides. So and with a scar, this I think is true, but I know it's true with bones, but the scar where the skin tissue is, or I'll just use the example of bones because I don't actually know if it's true with scars, but with bones, like the bone will grow back stronger. And so while it might not look as nice, it's a nuanced picture of where you've come from the original wound, or the original breaking, the original reaction to the finality of the situation. And so while it might not look as pretty, it's stronger. While it might not look as beautiful, it's stronger. It's nuanced. It lacks beauty, but what it lacks in beauty, it gains in strength. And I think that this is really important to note, that when we do begin to heal from these wounds, the relationship that we have with these wounds, or let's say like with a breakup, or with a, I guess with a passing as well, becomes unique. There's no hatred for the person, but there's also not a wish to be around that person all the time. And in the case of a passing, it's just not possible. And that wish does exist, but it's not possible. So you see how the outcome after a final situation is a unique one, where all the very extreme emotions and pain subsides, and what emerges is a very nuanced picture, and one that can't really be put into a box. So what's the point of even saying all this? Why does all this even matter? Well, I think it's important because we have to begin to realize that, or maybe I should say, we should begin to become proactive against the parts of us unconsciously that the moment something bad happens, we try to rip out a bunch of ourselves to get it off. You kind of have to learn not to pick a scab because it's so enticing when you get a scab to just like pick at it. But it's something you have to learn that you can't do that. So you have to make proactive steps to not do that. And in that, and in the waiting, what you'll find, I think, is also a very nuanced picture of waiting. So I think that typically there's a sort of opposition. We have one way or the other, where on one side, when a breakup or a passing or some sort of grief happens, some sort of thing that would involve grief. In grief, I should say, there's two reactions usually. There's those, or on either side of the extreme, there's those who really begin to gravitate towards feeling and focusing on every emotion. And even within that, there's two sides of that extreme. One of them is to intellectualize all the emotions and to rationalize them away, right? And then the other one is sort of the pseudo-psychologist who is trying to feel every emotion for the sake of feeling every emotion, and because they think that, because they're so scared of the other extreme, which is to suppress and to not feel any of the emotions at all. I think both of these are obviously very wrong. And the middle ground between these, the sort of synergy between these, is to feel the emotions as they come and to not wish for anything that isn't there. And this takes a certain meticulous self-examination, and that can only happen through community and through prayer. That level of self-examination, where you are taking the emotions as they come and not wishing for emotions that aren't there, but also realizing that if emotions aren't there forever, then maybe you're not letting them come, and also not grasping, again, for emotions that aren't there. These things take community, and they take prayer and sitting with yourself and knowing yourself, which I've talked about in another video. And so I think that the goal is not to intellectualize or mentalize these pains or these wounds, but rather to integrate them into who you are, and they become another part of the mosaic of who you are, although they could be a very not as pretty part of the mosaic, a part of the mosaic that doesn't feel quite right. They're still a part of it, and they're still a part of you, and they have their own sort of beauty. They have their own type of beauty, and they can be attached to very nuanced emotions like nostalgia or even love, hopefully love. And the last thing I want to know, especially when it comes to breakups, is we have to understand that love shared is never wasted. And even, I guess, not even in just breakups, in any relationship, one that ends with a passing, one that ends with, or friendships that end with, distance, or just a slow sort of fizzling out, love shared is never wasted. And the evidence of that is only in the present. And I think I'll save that for another video, but that's something we have to remember. And I think that grief and loss can be very hard, obviously. But if we can take proactive steps not to reject the pain, we can also take proactive steps not to grasp at the pain, but rather to let the emotions and the feelings come when they come, to feel them, to not over intellectualize them or over feel them, maybe is the word, but to take them as they come and try to integrate those parts of you into a healthy lifestyle, into a better, even better, healthier lifestyle, one that isn't on one side of the extreme or the other, but one that's nuanced and integrated and functions well, and that has a sense of peace. Because ultimately what we're looking for is peace. We're not looking all the time for joy and happiness because we just won't have it. But peace, the Bible says the joy of the Lord is our strength, and the patristics interpreted joy as deep peace. And what I mean by the patristics is the early church fathers. They interpret it as a deep peace, a deep setting peace. It's very settled, it's grounded, and that takes time and prayer and fasting and community, of course, but all of these things are available to us through Christ's community and through Christ Jesus. These things are available to us, and so these are things to remember on grief and loss.